Almost everyone has an opinion about Eddie Howe. I wonder what it is that you saw in Eddie that season, and I guess in subsequent seasons, that a lot of people have missed or don't really understand, that you think is the actual secret for how he managed to keep that club in the Premier League.
Well, I think that Eddie has always earned respect. And, I preempt the respect with earn, because I think in any walk of life, you have to earn it. I think so many people think they're the gaffer, they're the manager, they're the chairman, they're the chief executive. Everybody in the room should respect you. That is something that I never think is right. Yeah. I think you have to set an example and then earn it. And what I love about Eddie, and I've always spoken highly of him, is he has this insatiable appetite for personal development. And I think that is really the key to anybody's success. I mean, I've just enjoyed my 80th birthday a couple of months ago, and I'm still learning. Yeah. I still have this insatiable appetite to develop what skills I have so I can better myself. And by bettering myself, I can better the people that I'm responsible for. So if you take an analogy of a manager who is set in his ways, we could all name names, here, not the old days of, Malcolm with the 5-foot cube. I'm talking about a cigar here, coming into a room and do it's my way or the highway, or you're just the face. You wear a suit, not even a tracksuit, and you've got 3 coaches, that are, really training the boys. Eddie is leading the training. I believe you will respond with respect, knowing that the manager is still developing his own skills, right, as opposed to being set in his ways and not being willing to change anything. This is my skill set. This is how you're going to play. We've got a lot of square pegs. We've got a lot of round holes, and we've got all the square pegs in the round holes, and the round holes, Christ knows where they are. And we've seen examples of that recently. Yeah. Again, no names, no pack drill. But Eddie has always earned the respect of how he treats people one-on-one, how he treats people collectively, how he respects his staff. And that is what I think his greatest strength is. And once you've got the dressing room, and Eddie proved from Division 2 right through to the Premier League that no matter how much status you have, how godly you are, then unless you have the dressing room, the players can crucify you with their lack of effort or lack of support or lack of discipline. And I think that is Eddie's greatest strength.
Yeah. How hard was it when Bournemouth and Eddie parted ways?
Oh my God, it was one of the most, for me, one of the most emotional, moments. That, when he left, and it was almost inevitable. You could just see the strain that Eddie was going through. People would comment to me that, has he been at the football club too long? I resent all that, because right up until the last match, which was Everton, away, which was, Rose and I were the only 2 directors. Well, Rose wasn't a director, but we were the only 2 people that were there, because it was COVID.
Yeah.
And Eddie knew, and afterwards he said, I knew I'd look up into the stands, chairman. I knew we'd always have your support. I never missed a match, home or away, 17 years, within reason. And that was in, every competition. He could always count on my support. And I felt as chairman that they should be able to look up into the director's box and know you're there, that you're not offering an opinion, having watched something on the television or, listened to a broadcast. I think it was you had to be part of that, joined at the hip.
Yeah.
And I think that the inevitable, was around the corner. But what was interesting, we played Everton, we won the game, still got relegated, and Rose and I, we were married in Chester, and we decided not to stay in Liverpool that night, win, lose or draw. It was all, it was all too much. So we stayed in Chester, and Eddie phoned me on the Monday when we were driving back, because after the game, all the dressing rooms were segregated because of COVID. So I didn't get a chance to see him after the game. And we had about an hour's conversation. How do I know it was an hour? Because the phone rang when I was just passing Knutsford services, and it concluded when we got to Stafford at the end of the roadworks. And it's funny, that's how significant this phone call was. And I'm racing through this without getting emotional because, Rose said, I think that'll be the last conversation you have.
Oh, man. So Rose felt it?
Yeah.
And why did she think that?
She could tell, I think, because of the silence.
Right.
Excuse me.
Yes. Listen, you and Eddie shared something incredible, and you... I always say you deserve to be emotional about these things because it was such an important part of your life. And if you weren't emotional, it means you didn't share what you did. And I'm sure you've thought about this long and hard. What had happened that had led to the decision for Eddie and Bournemouth to part ways?
Well, I think it was mutual company.
Yeah,
there was no decision that we wanted Eddie to leave or Eddie, wanted to leave. I think it was just the collective that, he felt, I think that it was a moment in his life and in his career that he needed to step back. And I know he's spoken, about this, now after, funny enough, a long time and almost a year out. And, it was almost a year to the day, he took a sabbatical. But he felt that, I assume he felt, it wouldn't be right for me to put words into Eddie's mouth, but that he couldn't take the football club forward. And he felt that maybe a change was going to be beneficial to Bournemouth, AFC Bournemouth, and going to be beneficial to him. Mm. And I think, that proved to be the case, in particular with Ed. I think getting the opportunity after a 12-month sabbatical to go to Newcastle United, where, he's the Messiah, despite them, you've got to look at supporters who are fanatical. I mean, I love going to St James's Park. I love going to Anfield, to name but two stadiums. This is beyond supporters. It's their life. So it's no surprise when the team goes through a bad run. Do we need a new manager? He's brought silverware. He's a god. Yeah. I know this from, him coming to the book signing, with me at Waterstones in Newcastle and bringing the town to a standstill and closing the store.
Really?
It was remarkable for me to see 3 floors of people spiral in Waterstones for him and Jason to come and sign my book, with me.
Good for book sales as well.
It was great. Well, do you know what I said to them? It was incredible. Because I'd only asked him, it was about a month before, we were playing Newcastle, and it was on my birthday. So 21st of September, and it was my 80th birthday. And the game was then switched to the Sunday. So, and that was when I was having my 80th party at home for the family. So I messaged Ed and said, I won't be at the game. So he said, Chairman, why don't you come to the hotel, have dinner with me and the boys? Which was amazing, and I met all the team and he introduced me to everybody. And afterwards, I said to him, I've got a huge favour to ask of you. And I said, this is huge. He said, Chairman, whatever it is, the answer is yes. And I just said, look, I'm about 3 million short. And he joked, he said, Chairman, if it was only money, the answer's still yes. I said, it's beyond money, this. He said, what is it? I said, I'm having I've written the book, which he wrote the foreword to. And I said, I want to have a book signing in Newcastle, because literally the book is about you as much as it's about me. And, you have given me the honour of writing the foreword for the book.
On this podcast, we often talk about the smart decisions that shape your life or your career. But when it comes to our health, too many choices are still based on guesswork. Stride One is designed to change that. It's not just another health test. It's the type of service you'd expect from an elite longevity clinic. The home testing kit analyzes your DNA, blood, and gut microbiome, covering over 500 biomarkers to give you a complete picture of your health. You get science-backed guidance like how your gut health affects your energy, or whether you need more B vitamins or magnesium. As well as that, you'll get quarterly consultations with a dedicated Stride expert to help you act on your results. Stride 1 even measures your biological age with repeat testing every 6 months so you can track your progress and see what's really working. So if you want to feel, think and perform better today and invest in your future health, Stride is the solution for you. To find out more and unlock a special offer, just go to getstride.com/RWIH. That's getstride.com/RWIH.
So would you come to do a book signing with me at Waterstones? He said, of course I can. What date is it? And I said, oh my God, you are literally above and beyond. I said, as if I'd have the audacity to have already got a date without asking you whether you would come. So I just said, now the answer's yes. You and Jason decide when the date will be. And he came back, with the date. Right. He'd never even set foot into the middle of Newcastle. And for him to come along, and even when we had photos with all the fans, I said, look, if you want just a picture with Eddie and Jason, I'm happy to step aside. No, Jeff, if it wasn't for you, we'd never have got Eddie and Jason. And I literally had a picture with Eddie, Jason, and every Newcastle fan. And I said to the manager, he was the regional manager of the bookstore, when we were planning it, I just said, I don't care if people think I'm his grandfather and I've got nothing to do with the book, as long as they come along and buy one. So it did really help, on the day. But that shows the strength of our relationship, that, he would come along and do that for me along with Jason.
What a journey you shared together. I want to talk about the sort of financial side of the game now, because people think, Bournemouth win the Premier League. They're rolling in money, everything's easy, suddenly all of the challenges that you have as a lower league football club are gone. What was the reality?
Well, it's like chalk and cheese, talking about where the club are now, especially under the new ownership, to what it was like when I first bought the football club. We couldn't afford a first-class stamp. The club every day, people were talking about, Jeff, you were chairman of the football club, you owned the football club. What was your sort of daily routine? The daily routine was, how do we find an investor to help save the football club? And it was impossible. My vice chairman, Steve Sly, and I went from Land's End to John O'Groats. And people say, how would you identify an investor? And I would say, we used the mirror test. We'd stick it in front of somebody's mouth. If it steamed up, they were alive. They were a potential investor. And we'd talk to them. It was impossible. Why would anybody invest in a football club that had no assets, no money? It was really, really hard. And, we had to really struggle. And of course, my first interview with Tony Husband of BBC, it was the usual new owner walking around the stadium. I'm puffing my chest out. Jeff, why have you bought this car crash of a football club that's been in financial difficulties all its life? And I said, oh my God, Tony, thank you for asking me that. I'm a fully qualified financial advisor. I'm going to bring financial stability to the football club. A year later, I'm putting it into administration. I bought it with my heart, not my head. But the reality is that today, the finances are incredible. And when you look at, the progress that this football club has made, I'm so proud, so beyond words of the legacy that I've left the football club. It's I think about that all the time, and my love with the supporters, the staff, the players, certainly, the players of my era, is still exactly the same as it was the day that I left the football club. Nothing has changed. I'm there on match day. I still have the love in, and it adrenalizes me. It's still, keeps me part of that football club, because it was like a divorce. You know, when I had to step down, I was an emotional wreck for probably almost a year.
Really?
Yeah. I never realised, and it's probably only now I'm realising just what the club meant to me.
Now, for people that don't know the story of how you ended up owning a football club in the first place, I think this is interesting from a kind of business perspective. Like, what was your rough net worth when you decided to buy a football club?
I was not that wealthy,
Right.
but I just sold my business.
Yeah.
Did I have a few million? Yes, but it was, I wouldn't have enough money to pay a Premier League footballer for the time that you and I have actually been together today, which I think is less than an hour.
So how do you come to the decision that it was the right thing to do?
I was asked recently, I was actually across the road at the Langham Hotel doing, it was a showcase, I think with Peter Schmeichel and Michel Roux. And I was asked a question when it came to the Q&A by somebody, a young lady, who said, Jeff, this must have been the greatest decision of your life, buying the AFC Bournemouth. And I just paused, almost lulling. There was about 250 people there, lulling them into a sense of false security. And I paused and I just said, I can absolutely say without any question, and I think they're still thinking it's going to be positive, it was the worst decision of my life. And I bought it because of a number of things. One, my passion for football from being a child, to my best friend was manager of the football club, Kevin Bond, who I'd known for over 40 years, and almost maybe subliminally thinking I'm going to save his job, if I actually become owner of the football club. So it was the worst decision of my life. And what I said to people that night, and I say to you, your listeners, is that you cannot, because it had a happy ending, you cannot make the worst decision of your life suddenly the best decision of your life because it had a happy ending. You have to compartmentalize that decision so you never make that decision again. Yeah. And that's how I articulated it that night. And it always will be the worst decision of my life, but it created the greatest journey of my life. 17 years, it's almost 20 years because it was 2006 when I bought the club. So we're now in 2026, 20 years ago. It's created the greatest journey, the greatest excitement of my life outside of my own family, the privilege and the honour of meeting people like yourself today.
But then people will think, how can it have been the worst decision of your life if that's what it gave you?
Because it had the happy ending of the people that I met on the way that actually helped me. So having bought a club that I realised very quickly had an amazing amount of debt that was non-disclosed.
How much?
Well, it was nearly 3 million of additional debt. We're now talking about a Division 1 club that was soon to be relegated to Division 2. There's no assets. People say people were suspicious. I had death threats. My wife had death threats. My children had death threats. They're thinking, why does this man from Manchester buy a football club that he doesn't even support? He's been a Manchester City supporter since he's the age of 5. Yeah. Why the hell has he come here to ruin our life?
What was it like the moment that you realised the true debt of the football club was 3 million?
It was, where's this dark hole?
Did you think you basically bankrupted yourself?
Well, yes, and that's why I had to put it into administration. Because prior to that, I was funded. So when you talk about the level of expenditure relative to your own wealth, it was a huge percentage. We're not talking about, our new owner, who's a billionaire. And, we've just bought a player now for, with add-ons 35 million, Rayan. And, we've bought numerous other players. But back then, I was paying 100,000 a month in round figures to keep the club alive. So this was our wages were circa 1.2 million a year. So I'm paying this out of my own pocket. And then it was the residual amount of what was needed. So if you said on X day, we don't have a home game, Mark Luther, who was, our accountant at the time, who I worked closely with, we'd have a meeting every week. Chairman, we need a cheque for 100,000. And then we'd have a home game the next week. We might only need 40,000. We've got some revenue in from, the local fish and chip shop who have decided, to sponsor the corner flag. That was 8 shillings and sixpence. So we only need 55,000 this week. But in round figures, it was about 100,000 a month that I had to budget for. So suddenly I've worked 25 years in round figures to build up one of the largest independent brokerages providing financial advice to, as was Her Majesty's, the late Her Majesty's forces, and providing financial security for me and my family. And I was 61 when I bought the football club. It's hard for me, to even think that I'm 80 now because, Eddie has always said, Chairman, you are the world's oldest teenager. And it's probably because I act like it. And I've been blessed with, I've got a young family and I've been blessed with a young family at the football club. So the 4 inches between my ears are alive, with positivity and energy. And please God, they, remain so. So I, was finding that I can't continue this. So we had to put the club into administration.